Hello, my name is Matthew, and I thought I would talk about some of my favorite modernist novels. I just recently finished reading Ulysses by James Joyce, and when I was done, I had a few palate cleansers, and then last night I was still in the mood of reading something modernist, um, something Irish, and something fun. So instead of the feeling of working through Ulysses, uh, I started reading At Swim Two Birds by Flann O'Brien, which is such a fun novel. And read about 40 pages last night. Um, and it got me thinking about some of the modernist novels that really thrill me, fill me with excitement, and um, the kind of books that feel like they're being inventive and pushing boundaries and not just trying to tell a simple, effective, entertaining story, doing other things with style and complexity and voice. And to have a 10 list of modernist novels, you do have to have Ulysses by James Joyce. It's a seminal work, one of the most influential, notable modernist novels. And I spoke at length about my thoughts on this book. Um, but when I started reading At Swim Two Birds, there are a few comparisons that I made that were immediately evident. One was the Irishness of the language, and then also the characters that we meet immediately feel human and authentic, unlike the characters and the voices that I've found in Ulysses. And I've made similar points before, especially with the idea of not quite getting Ulysses. And something that I've heard before is, oh well, you have to find old recordings of James Joyce reading Finnegan's Wake, or obscure tapes of him reading excerpts from Ulysses, which I find to be a rather absurd argument. The work stands for itself. The words on the page need to evoke those voices on their own. That's my thought on that. And At Swim Two Birds is triumphant with that. These characters really feel like they're speaking, and they're speaking with that Irish accent, the Irish voice, and Irish thought process, and Irish phrasing that I can just hear ringing in my head, just coming off of the words on the page. And the sense of humor, which is my own personal taste. I didn't find the humorousness in Ulysses to gel with me. It didn't ring true. Whereas I was immediately giggling and laughing at Swim Two Birds. Uh, we have this inadequate young student living with his father and basically bumming around, locked up in his bedroom, smoking cigarettes and not doing his studies, and the father being disappointed in him. And he says, "Oh no, I'm studying while I'm locked up in my room." And he says, "Well, why don't you come down to the dining room table and read here? I can see what you're doing." He goes, "Oh, trust me, I'm reading." Um, I'm reading this now. When I finish it, I might make a video talking about this. But um, if you're interested in a modernist novel and you are perhaps intimidated by what you've heard of Ulysses or just the length of it, I highly recommend this. Incredibly readable, fun, and inventive. The other obvious uh, main contender for the great modernist Irish writer, and these aren't all Irish writers, and I'm not choosing multiple works by a single author, but the lines do blur a little bit, and so this is Samuel Beckett's trilogy, Malloy, Malone Dies, and The Unnameable. This is a really great packaging, and I find this to be probably Samuel Beckett's greatest achievement. Not my favorite. Some of the plays, Waiting for Godot, I find just stellar. But some of the things that you'll find in modernist novels, in At Swim Two Birds, Ulysses, others, is that interior monologue where the author is trying to capture the connections that your mind makes as you're thinking, instead of very well constructed sentences that communicate very effectively, but have, by its very nature, an artificial construct. We don't often, while we're daydreaming, speak in paragraphs. And again, Samuel Samuel Beckett is funny, serious, bleak, hopeful, and other inventive things like characters and plot and setting really kind of fall to the background. Are you coming down? Now, what exactly a modernist novel is, I'm not quite sure. There's some quite old, ancient novels, books that I consider to be very modernist, and then classics like Don Quixote, which is not on this list, but there's a strong argument of the modernist feelings that you can find in something like Don Quixote. I will show Jacques the Fatalist by Denis Diderot. So inventive and playful. I believe I've talked about this in a video as well. Immediately, the author, the authorial voice, is arguing with the reader, and there's this combativeness and a playful argument between the reader and the characters, and how the story is told. If we have two characters that come to a fork in the road and they're going to separate, the author will take a moment to speak to the reader and say, which one of these characters should we follow? We follow one, it turns out to be a boring story. The author says, let's go back to the other character. And then it is serious and thoughtful and philosophical. Great fun to read. I highly recommend everything by Denis Diderot. Another modernist novel in my own sensibility is A Tale of a Tub by Jonathan Swift. I'm stretching the definition of a novel, but really all of these books are. And one of the things that I just can't you can't get away from is the fact that the novel just never begins. It's a series of these dedications and prologues and prefaces and introductions, and we're just kind of grinding through the beginning. Just let's start the book, and I feel like the next book I'll mention, which I don't have or I can't find, which if you think, books from I don't know, But from the time of Diderot and Swift, maybe they're not quite modernist. I don't think you could argue that the life and opinions of Tristram Shandy is not a modernist novel, and an absolute blast to read. And just right now, while I'm thinking, it occurred to me that Jacques the Fatalist has these false starts, and A Tale of a Tub is completely full of these repetitive beginnings. Um, Tristram Shandy, I can't remember, but it's like maybe 100 pages into the book. It's a long novel, like 600 or 800 pages. Um, Maybe 50 or 100 pages into the book before the main character is even born. We have this extended, this protracted birthing sequence and um, amusing anecdotes about the shape of the character's features and head. Um, but what just occurred to me is that that also happens in Ulysses, where we have the whole beginning with Buck Mulligan and Stephen Dedalus, like the Odyssey, where instead of starting with Odysseus, we actually begin with Telemachus. Um, but one of the few times where I feel like James Joyce is very clear on the timeline is when Leopold Bloom finally makes his appearance in the next portion. Um, we're told very specifically um, we're now going back in time to 8 o'clock in the morning. So we spent time with some characters throughout the morning. We're now, like Quentin Tarantino, shifting timelines again uh, to restart the book. Um, Now, I've shown some books that are pretty big, pretty slim, average, 200 pages, um, but um, I don't know how I couldn't mention it, but I only pulled out one volume. But this is Swan's Way, but the whole of In Search of Lost Time, which does have similar features where to some of the books that I've just mentioned, um, just spending time in the interior of someone's mind while they just luxuriate on the memories of their own life. And the style, where Proust has no trouble meandering and tumbling along and having the confidence in the luxurious, strong use of his language to capture your attention and to keep you moving along through the story. Um, you are falling into an ocean, but it's an ocean with a tide. I absolutely love In Search of Lost Time or Remembrance of Things Past. And there's a new edition coming out May 23rd, 2023. A new translation. I can't remember the new translator, but it's going to be by NYRB Classics, but Proust. So a lot of 20th century, and then some things that are going back into the centuries. But there's also modernist contemporary novels. And one of my favorite and most recent is Duck's Newbury Port by Lucy Ellman. Terrific, big fat thing. Really enjoyable to hold in the hand. Floppy. And it has a gimmick, which is just one long streaming sentence, which you'll find in the ending soliloquy in Joyce. So, but it does feel natural. It has this refrain. I believe it's the fact that, and that just starts rhythmically chiming throughout the book, and it's this I can't remember. It's this woman in Ohio, and she's baking pies and thinking about her life. And it's huge. Another ocean. Some of these books are just falling into the wealthy abyss of the human mind. Um, and then here I have another trilogy, but these do feel more contained as single novels. So I'll show the last one, and then I'll show the other two. And this is Phone by Will Self. I love the cover design. And the two, what makes up the trilogy is first Umbrella, and then Shark, and then Phone. And I love that Will Self likens himself to a very serious author. He's playful and he's funny and can be outlandish, but he's fundamentally pushing boundaries and trying to be creative and inventive and to great success. These are challenging works where you need to be involved in what's going on. Like many of these books, the plot starts becoming besides the point. There are characters, there are a plot, but just one of the features of Will Self that just slays me is nearly on every page, you'll find some word that you've never heard of, or a word that was completely unexpected. And unlike Joyce, where sometimes you have that feeling of a creaky crowbar inserting obscure words, here I do feel like Will Self's zaniness is so well described on the page that it becomes like a fun puzzle. What in the heck is that word? Which I really love. Now, to conclude, one of the greatest um, authors, but one of the great writers of modernist novels that are pushing the arts forward is Virginia Woolf. And like some of these, you could just list a handful of Virginia Woolf books. You could just have to the Lighthouse and now my memory's escaping me, but Orlando, there's a couple others. The interesting thing about this book is there is such a direct comparison with Ulysses, in the fact that it's a day in the life. And a lot of these books, time is such an important element, how it squeezes and stretches, how you can utilize the experience of time. Proust takes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages. This is a slim volume compared to something a little bit weightier. But you really do feel the presence of a single day and how important a single day can be. And you can't mention Virginia Woolf or Virginia Mrs. Dalloway without speaking of the sheer gorgeousness and beauty of the language. Challenging aspects of reading Virginia Woolf are really sheared off by the loveliness, the poetry. And I do take some selfish pleasure in being an English speaker and being able to read the words that she wrote, the beautiful poetry that she made into novels and essays. I can only read the echoes of Proust at the moment. Um, so 10-ish of um, my favorite anyway. There's obvious omissions, either things I couldn't really get on the list, or things I haven't read, things I've never even heard of, um, biases, well-known books that um, I just don't care for. But this is a good list of um, modernist novels that I like. So, um, and with Miss Virginia Woolf, Mrs. Alloway. Um, Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any comments on any of these books, or your thoughts on modernism, thoughts on what you think about how I think about modernism. Um, and so, thank you for watching. Please leave a comment if you would like, and take care.